Welcome back. We've got another topic on influence, and so of course I brought in Devin Thorpe, but this one is a pretty awesome way to look at it. How can an individual change the world? We got some real steps that you can take to do that. So I'm excited to have this conversation, Devin. Thanks for being here again. So as we were talking about kind of reviewing the content before the video, there are 3 steps to take that you can actually, as an individual, change the world, which that's a pretty big deal. For somebody like me who wants to make a difference or leave a legacy, understanding these 3 steps. So I'm excited to hear what you have to share there. And to lay a foundation for that, it looks like that there's kind of a mindset or a way of looking at things or a perspective that we need to have. And you've got kind of 3 different ideas there. So we'll cover those 3 ideas, and then we'll get into the 3 steps of how we can change the world as an individual.
Yeah, so, fundamentally, the first thing I think we need is a deep sense of optimism.
Okay.
Because, the world's problems are big. Mm-hmm. I don't want to gloss over that or minimize it. As we speak, during our conversation, as we're recording this 10-15 minute video, there are people dying in Yemen of starvation. There are people who are at risk of dying in conflicts around the world, but especially in Afghanistan and Yemen and elsewhere. There are really serious problems. 2.5–3 million people will die of infectious diseases this year, for which we have good preventions, right? And yet they will die anyway because we're not getting the water to the end of the road. So I don't want to minimize the problems, but it takes a deep sense of optimism to tackle one of those problems, right? We're not talking about rounding the edge of the corners on a rectangle anymore. We're talking about real problems that need real solutions. And so that deep sense of optimism is required. And I've seen that throughout my career in an interesting group of people. And you've probably seen this too. You probably are this way. The people I've seen with the greatest sense of optimism are entrepreneurs, right? We often talk about whether someone is a glasses half full, glasses half empty kind of person, right? Entrepreneurs are, in my experience, very different. Not universally, but pretty consistently. Mm-hmm. They're the sorts of people that can look at an empty glass and say, oh, yeah, that's basically full. And maybe that's not the language they would use. It's not that they really see the glass as full. It's that they know where to get the water, right? Mm-hmm. They don't care that it's empty because they know what to do to solve that problem. And so they have a deep, abiding sense of optimism that will carry them through all kinds of challenges. And so, especially when we're talking about really, big social changes, we need to channel that entrepreneurial optimism that says, I know where to get the water and I'm going to go get it and deliver that water, come hell or high water, that's what I'm going to do.
So that is a true principle that I really resonate with, and I'm glad you made the connection, because I believe it 100% in business and entrepreneurship. I've been 100% entrepreneur for about almost 9 years, and I've had some rough finances this whole time until this last year. I've been very, very blessed. And it's not that I haven't had successes in the past, but it's been rough, and if I would not have been optimistic and been able to really not get flustered by the thousands of mistakes that I've made, the thousands of obstacles I've run into. So that is huge. So carrying over, we're talking about if I as an individual want to change the world, optimism. And the first thing that actually came to my mind, even before thinking about my experience with business, I recently was at a marketing conference, but we got to hear a keynote from the founder of this nonprofit, Charity Water. I was struggling to find the name, but as I heard his story and what he's done and where his passion comes, the things he's been able to do, but he did put it in perspective.
Story.
he put it in perspective on how great the need is and how small of an impact they've made so far in comparison. Mm-hmm. Like, we could get overwhelmed with that, and we could feel pessimistic about that, because it's like, the need seems to be growing bigger than the impact we're making. But then again, I'm feeling this emotion that I felt when he spoke. But then you look at the difference that they have made, and you focus on that, and I was really impressed with his optimism, that even though he shared some of these stats, the impact that he made, I loved it.
No, there's no doubt about it, and it is exciting. If we look at the long span of history, not the last 10 years, the last 20 years, but look at the last 50 years, what we see is that vast numbers of people have had their lives improved dramatically, and water is accessible to more people now than ever. Mm-hmm. Yes, there are 700 million people who still need water, who don't have a consistent source, and there are more than 2 billion who don't have a toilet. I mean, these are huge populations of problems. But bear in mind, there are 5 billion people who have toilets. There are 6 billion people plus who do know where their water comes from now. These are great times to be alive, real great reasons for optimism, and it is exciting to see organizations and people like Charity Water going after this problem to solve it. So these are that optimism in the face of daunting challenges is important, and you see the power of it with Charity Water.
Okay, so if you've got that foundation of optimism, now let's get into the 3 steps.
Yeah.
What's step 1?
Well, step 1 is almost, I don't want to say it's a repudiation of that principle, but in a way it builds on it, right? But it is that action is more important than attitude. And so the first thing to do is to start doing something. And that's how Charity Water got started. It's a perfect example for this. He was out clubbing and wanted to start doing some good, and he just started doing good. And eventually, as he developed his passion for doing good and wanted to leverage his skills, being very socially connected, right? Mm-hmm. He built this organization that funds water projects, and he really, we've talked about some of these things in our other videos, but he was very mindful not only of the people he was serving, but very mindful of the people who wanted to give, and he really innovated some great things in terms of the way he created organizational transparency, donor transparency, so that if you give to Charity Water, they will use that money for a specific project, and you can go on and 2 years from now see how that project is doing and how much water has been delivered to how many people, and that kind of transparency is something unprecedented.
When I saw that, and I realized that 100% of the donation would go to the project because other donors have funded the charity, the nonprofit mm-hmm. organization itself, I'm just like, that's a cool way of doing it. Even though say I were to donate $1 amount and 10% of it would go to run mm-hmm. the nonprofit, for me it made me feel a lot better to know 100%. Get emotional here. Yeah. It's going to help these people that need water, and that there's other people that are making sure that the organization runs. Yeah, I love that. I love that transparency. So, but in that example, we're talking about it here because of really actions are more important than the attitude. And he was just, I've done so much that's been self-centered, focused on myself. I've got this life that, I want to completely change things. And he went out and just started serving, even paying his own way to join that medical ship or whatever.
He went out on the Mercy ships.
And just like, I'm going to get out there and just start doing. I like that.
And so, it built. His path sort of evolved, but it started with him saying, I will do something good today, and we'll see where it goes, right? And a lot of us have a clearer sense of direction than he had mm-hmm. At that point. Not to be critical of him. He's obviously done amazing things.
Yeah, he had no idea how far it would take.
He didn't know where he was going. He just wanted to change his life, and kudos to him. As we start out with that intent to change the world, there is nothing as powerful as actually doing something to make that change happen. Even though it will be small, when we first start out. We're not going to start out with something big. There's a great analogy to your approach with the videos. Answering a simple question that 10 people want answered, right? It won't feel big when you answer that question for 10 people. But eventually, when you answer a lot of questions, the whole thing changes. The whole dynamic changes, and it begins to snowball.
I'm glad you made that connection, because that's a lot of what I teach, is focusing on the videos that are real specific and have a low search volume, because you'll get such great results with it. That is an interesting point, that just focus on acting, helping out in the small way.
And it builds. It will build, right? As you start doing, right, you learn, right? And that's how you become the master of YouTube, is you started making YouTube videos, and you experimented, and you learned. And now, it's mushroomed into a huge thing for you and for other people that you're helping, that's right? True. So it's the same in almost every area. Now, in some areas, there's going to be more friction, less tailwind, but those principles still apply. So,
okay, what's step number 2?
So step number 2 is to collaborate.
Okay.
When I say collaborate, I really am talking about massive collaboration. It's tempting and relatively easy to collaborate with a peer.
Okay.
And there's no question that is helpful, right? So if I am shoveling muck and mud off a beach, after an oil spill, if I got a friend to help me, that would cut my work in half.
Right.
If I got a Rotary Club with 20 people to help me, that would cut my work by 95%.
Yeah.
Right? If I got a high school with 3,000 students to come help me, I no longer am shoveling muck and mud at all. I'm organizing the process, right? So you see how collaboration, you want to scale it up. It may be impossible. If the optimal partner for you on day one is the WHO, the World Health Organization, with all of its, resources all around the world, well, you may not be able to partner with them on day one. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't identify and start working toward that goal, right? To engage them in dialogue, because you never know when they're going to say, we need your expertise. Let's figure out how to replicate your model, your idea across our 12,000 employees in 184 countries. And suddenly your idea is no longer you delivering, maternal child care in Cambodia. Now it's the WHO delivering improved maternal child care and around the world.
Yeah, that's huge.
So that's the mindset I think we have to have, is to look for that massive collaboration opportunity.
And I like thinking about it with our conversations of using influence for good. And in this case, if we want to really make a difference in the world or change the world, then we can collaborate and we can partner with friends and bring others in with us. But if we can use our own influence and our own ideas to find those larger organizations, larger groups, then that's really just about leverage and finding a way to find that lever to make a bigger impact with more and more hands, I guess. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's awesome. Okay, so that's a helpful point to know.
Yeah.
What's point number 3?
So point number 3, and I observed, I really gathered these principles from the polio eradication effort that is an ongoing global effort. 30 years ago, there were 350 to 400,000 cases a year of polio. Last year, there were 22.
Wow.
Not 22,000, 22. We are almost done with polio eradication. Now, not quite, and that's kind of the point here. What got the polio eradication initiative through 99% of the way, they figured out was not going to get them the rest of the way. They actually got the number of polio cases in the world down below 1,000, like 15 years ago. And they still haven't got it to 0. It's really a challenge. And it was only about 5 or 6 years ago that they realized we need an end game strategy, they call it. And I think it's a brilliant name, right? there's got to be a way to bring this to its conclusion. And in some cases, if you're not working toward eradication of something, the goal might be expressed a different way. But for you, for instance, in your YouTube world, the goal may be, how do I get on network television? How do I take this from being YouTube famous to being network television famous or truly Hollywood famous? Because there's an order of magnitude more eyeballs there than on YouTube, as big as your audience is on YouTube, right? And so to make that leap, you need an end game strategy, because what got you famous on YouTube won't make you Hollywood famous, won't make you network TV famous. What gets you successful in one village or one country may not be successful everywhere. And so you need to have an end game strategy that takes you for that last measure. And in the polio eradication effort, what we're finding is it's way harder than we thought it would be. And it's really shocking how difficult it is to get the last piece. But I'm confident that we will see that done. I always say it's, for the last 5 years I've been saying it'll be this year or next year. I still believe that, even though this is now the 5th year in a row I've been saying this year or next year will be the last year with polio cases. But it has taken a massive effort. I think we're now spending on the order of 3 or 4 times per year what we were spending 10 years ago. On polio eradication.
So as I'm thinking about this, it seems like this is a tough step, but to really have clarity on what the end goal really is.
Yeah.
So we can achieve, if we're talking about YouTube. By the way, the goal isn't to go to corporate television or traditional television, but I understand the comparison there, because it would be a complete different strategy.
Yeah.
But so to really know, okay, if I want to change the world, what is that end goal? And with polio, it's to completely 100% eradicate that disease. And then to have some flexibility and kind of understanding that the methods are going to need to change. I mean, how do you know? How do you figure out? Because I guess it hasn't been figured out fully with the polio case.
Right.
How do you figure out that end game strategy?
I liken it to a marathon. We do a lot of training for a marathon. You run a marathon or two, I think.
Yeah, just one full, but I found that I like half marathons.
Yeah, so do I. But I've run 3 marathons, and all that training we do in advance is really for the last mile. It's not so we can run the first mile fast. Yeah. It's relatively easy to train for a 5K. That first 3 miles is just not that hard once you've trained for a marathon. Mm-hmm. All that training is so that you can stagger through that last mile. And I think that's kind of a helpful analogy to recognize there's just a massive amount of work required. And the reason you and I like half marathons instead of full marathons is there is less training. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the primary reason.
That's exactly it, yeah.
And because training for a full marathon takes a lot of time. You got to put in the miles, or you're just not going to have a successful outcome. I think figuring out the work required, it clearly is a higher order, right? So with polio, the easy measure is, we're spending 3 or 4 times as much money as we once were. And of course, we're concentrating on fewer cases of polio. So in some ways, you'd expect it to be easier. But what we're finding with polio specifically is that there are conflict areas in Afghanistan where it's difficult to go. The Taliban works with the polio people some days. Some Taliban tribes are more accommodating than others. But that's the reality, right? Mm-hmm. Is trying to get into Taliban-controlled areas. And then if you're not in an area and polio is still thriving in an area, people occasionally leave, right? So they leave and they go other places. So all around Pakistan and Afghanistan, you have cases popping up all the time because people leave the areas where they're really flourishing, and then they drop that virus all around those 2 countries. And so it's really, really hard to get it. And I could go on and on about why it's difficult, but clearly greater effort is required, and you need to be preparing for that greater effort. down the line to get over that next hurdle.
A lot of times when I think about, we'll just say YouTube goals of where we want to take our channel, we think about it in opposite terms of it gets easier. So we say like the first 100 subscribers is the hardest, or the first 1,000 is the hardest. But then, you know, go from 1,000 to 2,000 or even 1,000 to 10,000 might be equal or even less difficult than the first 1,000. And it just builds momentum from there.
Yeah.
But if I'm thinking about YouTube as a stepping stone towards my, a bigger goal, meaning getting 10 million subscribers, that's a great tool and a great platform, but that's not the goal. So if I understand more clearly what the goal is, okay, and then what would be the step when I get to 10 million subscribers, then what will I do and what will the steps be then? This might be the easy step actually compared to, if I really want to change the world, I really want to make an impact, knowing what that is and at least preparing for it in advance, knowing that the game's going to change several times along the way. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So that's how you change the world right there. Anyone can do it. And the great thing about changing the world, we often get discouraged. 2 final thoughts. May I share a couple of final thoughts? One is everyone who ever changed the world was a person who decided to change the world.
Very true.
Never discount your ability to change the world because you're just like a person, because everyone who did was. Second key thing, it takes an audacity that borders on crazy to change the world. And what I see is that many of the people who are having the most impact are extraordinarily ordinary, except for the crazy idea that they actually could change the world. That one key belief motivates them to take the action and do all these things I'm talking about, and they do change the world.
So if you have an idea and somebody tells you that's crazy, that's
a good sign.
Might be a good sign. All right,
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Now we know how to change the world. I really feel that your points were helpful. So thanks so much. If you want to find out more about Devin Thorpe and what he's doing, I'll put a link down below. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you tomorrow.